our next edition of our 10 Presidents, 10 Minutes. And as I've shared with all of our clients and our owners, I get the opportunity to really visit with a lot of the leaders of the industry and people that I get to call friends. Dave Labrozzi is who I'm visiting with right now, and I think he's probably got a lot of information that is going to be valuable. But Dave has really made his career out of the finance and the lending side in the aviation world. He was really in charge of the GE portfolio before it eventually became Global Jet Capital. And Global Jet Capital is one of the leading finance institutions. And I say finance, I know you guys do more than traditional financing. I know you do creative financing and things along those lines. But if you haven't heard of Global Jet Capital, there's certainly somebody you should know within the industry. So Dave and I have been friends for a long time and knows quite a bit about the industry. So just want to introduce Dave here. So Dave, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here, Andy. Always glad to help out an industry pal.
Well, it's great. Well, the topic that we've asked Dave really to speak about is really the finance world and how COVID-19 and this current environment has affected the finance world. And Dave, maybe I can start with this. And we've all been through a number of different downturns. Obviously we were in 9/11, and then after 9/11 wound up being the economic downturn in 2008. This is another downturn. However, it seems to be quite a bit different, and the market seems to be responding differently. And I just thought it might be interesting if you can do a little bit of the compare and contrast how the finance world has dealt with this particular downturn and what you've seen compared to maybe the last couple of downturns that we've all lived through.
Okay, Andy, let me just take a second to kind of frame that, because this downturn, and I hate to admit, I've seen more of these downturns cycles than I'd care to admit, but this one is completely different than anything we've ever seen before, that I have ever seen before. And I think most people will want to compare and contrast this downturn versus what happened in the credit crisis of 2008 and the subsequent 10-year recovery that was kind of just meandering its way back to some desirability. And really what's fundamentally different about this is not caused by a structural underlying financial underpinning. That's why this calamity, so to speak, is different than anything else, and it's causing different behaviors. And first off, what I mean by that is in 2008, the world's capital markets froze. That didn't happen this time. And it didn't happen this time because the governments of the world were damn certain to be sure that it was not going to be a repeat of 2008 or, of course, far worse, the Depression. And so they strongly jumped in with lots of capital, lots of liquidity, and made sure that the world knew that the financial underpinnings were completely different than 2008. And so I think early on, this health crisis, this pandemic, had the possibility of becoming another one like 2008. But there was so much support that quickly I think we got over those initial concerns. And so what we've seen is, and I think anybody in the market that's lived through that cycle, 2008 and now, recognize that we are not seeing hundreds and thousands of airplanes come on the market for sale. They're not. We are seeing, and we monitor this every single week, especially in the markets where we tend to play, which is mid-size and up, 10, 12 years old and younger. There is some, what I'll call reoccurring aircraft listing for sale. And I think that's predominantly from companies and individuals that are placing new airplanes into the business, and they need to retire the one they're replacing. So inventory levels aren't climbing. We hear, I think, as the market hears, and fortunately, I think a lot of these are rumors about airplanes trading at horrible prices. Is there some price compression? Yes, but it's minimal. And what I attribute that to is not a whole-scale effect of the market, Andy. I contribute it to companies and individuals that became concerned early days that we were going to have a repeat. And I see companies perhaps having margin calls that wanted to raise liquidity. And so they sold their airplanes. And I don't care if it's how bad the down cycle is, there's always somebody out there with enough cash willing to invest at someone else's soft spot, if I can put it that way, and
Mhm.
get one heck of a deal on an airplane. So we saw some of that. We do not see wholesale downward material price changes. Just don't see it. The other factor that I'll talk about just briefly, and I know you've seen this as well. You've got a lot of clients, you manage a lot of airplanes. We are seeing companies and people put their airplanes into MROs and invest. They're not going to use the airplane, or they hadn't used the airplane for a while. It's time to do paint and interior, do
Mhm.
avionics,
Mhm.
do whatever need to be do, what they needed to be done to get that airplane ready for when this loosened up and it was time to go again. And so many of the air MRO facilities were very busy at historical highs. So that, to me, between not seeing the wholesale price changes, not seeing a lot of aircraft hit the market for for sale, and the MROs being busy, that is completely different than anything I certainly have ever seen before, and is incredibly encouraging.
That's great. So now maybe just a slight adjunct to what you had just explained. So clearly there's not a wholesale rush to sell a bunch of airplanes. Are you seeing behaviors of clients or potential clients shift? And one of the things I kind of noted is that in times of turmoil in the past, people would like to lease the airplane instead of purchase the airplane. So are people thinking about their financial instruments in which they're going to own the airplane or lease the airplane or use the airplane? Are they thinking about that differently than in the past, or are they still pretty solid as though the pandemic never happened?
Great question. So what I'll do is kind of frame it this way. Um, Almost everything we do is operating leases. We're very comfortable owning the airplanes when they come off a lease. We'll take and refurb them and they put them back out on lease again. And that is a competitive differentiator for us. So to kind of circle back to your question, it's not that I'm seeing a wholesale uptick in operating leasing, but what we are seeing is companies and individuals that have had the financial wherewithal in the past to fly private haven't. And now they are looking at, and I know this for a fact because I speak with 2 or 3 a week, they are looking at the fact that when 9/11 happened, ATC, not ATC, the federal government, I'm having a moment here where I can't think of the name of the agency.
Okay. Yeah.
There you go. So anyway, someone sitting next to you in an airplane or an individual, they feel very good that that person was appropriately screened and they're safe. Today's world, you don't know that for 100% certain.
Hmm.
They may not have symptoms, um, but they may not be safe. And so folks have said, you know what, I can afford to fly private. I have in the past. I'm now going to invest in private flight. And so the first step is for people who say, geez, I have to write this huge check to buy an airplane, and I don't know anything about owning it or operating it, so I need help. But let's find someone else that does this for a living, that will take and do a lot of these deals every single year and have to contend with it. Someone that knows the airplane that will take that residual value risk.
Hmm.
And so that has been good for us. I see this market growing. Um, Only time will tell how significantly. But
Hmm.
I look at the level of demand that we are beginning to see now. I look at the questions, the activity, the what should I do? What should I be thinking of from first-time buyers who have all chartered to some degree. But
Hmm.
it's a big step up from being a 25 or 30-hour a year charter customer to owning your own jet.
No question about it. So maybe we'll kind of round it out because we're going to be getting close to our 10 minutes here, and I want to be respectful of your time, and it seems to be a time frame that works. So now that it seems like some of the people that were never in aviation or in owning their airplanes in the past or leasing in your case, one of the things we're noting is the operating complexities, the operating environment continue to get more and more and more and more. Now you take a look at the restrictions and the regulations and how different government agencies and heck, even local governments are looking at aviation and corporate and laying on more regulatory burden. So when you guys, I say a lending or a leasing institution, are looking at first-time buyers, how do you really evaluate their operating profile to make sure your asset winds up staying safe and being protected? I mean, are you evaluating how they're going to run the airplane? And this is not meant to be a pitch for management companies, but how are you looking at the structure and evaluating the risk to make sure you guys are protected going forward?
Sure, sure. So it would be incredibly rare for us to buy an airplane and lease it to a company that has never operated a jet before. I just don't see it. And taking that a little bit further, we see big companies, flight departments are able to achieve an area of efficiency that someone owning one jet or a turboprop never will. And it's placed a lot of pressure. It's no longer on what's the cost of the airplane, but what's it going to cost to fly per year, per hour, and the maintenance cycles. And I think people that are somewhat experienced, be it through charter or fractional, get that. And so the long story short here, Andy, is I just don't see us entering a transaction with someone that is a first-time buyer because they just don't know what they don't know. The common scenario I will give to you is someone that has decided to buy an airplane for themselves, right? And they just figured out that I don't need to hire an attorney to do that. I can do it through my in-house real estate attorney, and no disrespect, but this industry is different than anything else on the planet. And there's 1,000 ways to get hurt, and you don't know what you don't know. And so from that same venue is when or that same degree of angle there, to the extent that we see someone saying, I want to, for example, GJC, you have an airplane off lease. It's perfect for what I want to do. I just want to lease that airplane. We're going to strongly suggest to them that one, they go find someone to manage the airplane and they get themselves professional tax, accounting, and legal representation. I don't ever want to be sideways with a client. I want to do business with people and companies that will last not just on that day we close a deal, but for the next 5, 10, 15 years. The way to do that is the foundation of strength and how they acquire, operate the airplane.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, closing questions, and then we'll do it for 30 seconds or so. In your crystal ball, you're a guy that's been around the block. In your crystal ball, 24 months from now, what do you think is going to wind up being the biggest change for our industry?
The biggest change for our industry. I think it's going to be in the operating environment.
Okay.
It's more complex than it's ever been. There's still, for example, all this regulations about emissions. The countries of the world are now looking very. When you fly into the European Union, you've got to quarantine yourself for 14 days. Those pop up, and I just think that it's every single trip that is. If you're not flying from your home airport to your company's secondary airport or your vacation home where you know the path, you've done it 100 times. There are a lot of trip wires, so to speak, that could get hung up and cause a lot of headaches. So I think it's all about the operating side of the business. And of course, then I'm going to say, and I have to, it's about capital efficiency.
No,
so that's where I think the focus will be going forward.
Well, this has wound up being great. So Dave, it's always great. The things that you say are so well received. And I know that the folks that are going to watch this are going to believe that. But again, with a guy with your experience to be able to address the folks that we're working with, I personally appreciate it. Next time I get up to the Northeast, I'll have to grab you lunch again, and maybe we'll go get a cocktail or something, but it's always great visiting with you. And I'm going to wind up hitting stop on the recording here, but I know we'll wind up talking real soon.
That'd be great, Andy. Always good to see you. Be well. Be safe.